Welcome back to the Solve Clinics YouTube channel. Our channel is going to be your go-to resource for full transparency on all things hair loss, men's health, skin health, holistic health, you name it. Our goal on this channel is to do exactly what our mission is here at Solve Clinics, which is to be brutally honest with patients and with viewers on the truths and the lies and the overall honest opinion of a provider that's going to tell you exactly how things work, and why they are the way they are. Our goal is for you to walk away from this content and from these videos having a better understanding of what your options are and, more importantly, what things you should try to avoid. Now, a little bit about myself. My name is Andrew. I am the founder and the president of Solve Clinics. We're the highest rated hair loss clinic here in Chicago. We have a location in the North Shore. We're building 2 locations in downtown Chicago as we speak. We are growing like crazy. The industry is changing like crazy. So I want to give you viewers an idea of what are the cost factors with the transplant and why do those cost factors exist. So the first factor that will influence the cost is the type of procedure that you receive. There are 4 main types of procedures that are being offered today. There's the FUT method or the strip method, about 20 to 30 years old. That's where they're actually cutting out an entire strip or almost like a roll, a sod of grass of hair on the back of your head. They're ripping that out, suturing or stitching that hair back together, leaving that scar on the back of your head, and then taking that strip of hair and extracting the grafts or the transplants out from that strip to place on the top of your head. The second method that's available today is the FUE method, what we view as the gold standard presently, and that's where a surgeon or a team is going to extract or cut each individual graft one by one. Now, if you look at the thickness of a graft, so imagine plucking a hair and seeing how thick that is. The beauty of the FUE process is that the incision is going to be just wider than that hair, usually around 0.7 millimeters to upwards of 1.1 millimeters in size, so teeny little incision. And then what's really nice about that is that when you make such a small incision on the skin, it heals quicker. It'll still leave a scar, but the scar is going to be very minimal, where a lot of providers will call it a scarless procedure because that scar is so minimal. Now, there still is scar tissue there. That is something that if you go to a provider and they say, oh, it's not going to leave a scar, that's not true. It will leave a scar, but the goal is that the scar will be so minimal that it won't be visible, or it could be hidden by the hair at a short length. The other method that's emerged is the ARTAS or the robotic hair transplant. Our opinion here at Solve is that robotic hair transplants are most likely the future of hair transplant procedures, but presently, the technology is not there yet. The ARTAS is going to be, or the robotic hair transplant options that are out there outside of the ARTAS is just the biggest name and the most recognizable, is where a machine is actually going to be doing the extractions of the hair. Now, the reason that it's not as good of a surgery as the FUE or a manually operated procedure is that robotic transplants use something called linear motion. So the machine is going to do straight line cuts. Now, the issue with that is that not everyone's hair is a perfect straight line, and not everyone's hair under the skin is a perfect straight line. Most hair under the skin is going to have some curvature, and some people's hair, such as our Black patients and some of our patients that have wavier hair, or our Middle Eastern patients, are going to have curlier hair under the skin, which is going to require a technique of actually taking the tool that removes the hair, the punch, the incision tool, and lightly rotating it to the curvature of the hair. Now, when you do one of these procedures manually or with an FUE, the provider or the person removing the hairs can feel for where the hair is under the skin and actually curve the device. With the ARTAS, you don't have that ability. It pinpoints where the hair is and it makes a straight linear incision. Now, one of the key causes of grafts that are removed dying and in turn ruining the transplant is something that we call transection of a graft. Transection is where the blade actually will nick the hair and damage the hair. That is the byproduct. Having high transection rates or killing a lot of those grafts results in a bad procedure. So here at Solve, for example, we have a survival rate of about 95% plus of our hairs. That means we're only transecting about 5% of our grafts, if not less. Now, the ARTAS, to compensate for its inability to follow the curvature of the hair, and what they do is they use a larger punch size. So if you remember when I was explaining the FUE or the manual process, punch size is going to be anywhere, or incision size is going to be anywhere from 0.7 to about 1.1, 1.2 max. The ARTAS is going to go larger than that. Now, if you think if it can't follow the curvature, what's the next easiest way for it to remove those hairs? Increase. So if you're starting there, I don't know if that's showing, but go from small, increase it larger. Now you have a larger area, a larger tissue that it's cutting. And because of that larger area, there's more of a grace of how much tissue is removed. So it's not going to nick that graft or that hair that's sitting in that tissue. That is addressing the problem of not killing hairs, but what it's doing is it's creating a new problem. Because of that larger incision size, you're seeing ARTAS procedures causing very noticeable scarring because it's no longer a micro incision, it's larger. It can damage the hairs around the graft that you're taking because of the size of the punch, so it's killing all those hairs around it just to get the one. And we see a lot of times patients that come in here after they've received an ARTAS procedure, their donor hair on the back is totally ravaged because of those large punches. So again, robotics likely the future once they can master and perfect the curvature and remove the linear motion and have more curved motion under the skin. But presently, it's not the best option. And ultimately what we're seeing is that the providers who are purchasing the ARTAS are plastic surgeons who are just looking to add the transplant onto their menu of items, but they don't want to perfect the hand piece of it because it's so difficult to become a professional or to perfect that process. They want to focus on the things that make them more money, like the breast implants and the nose jobs and the liposuction and all those things. And then they buy an ARTAS machine because it allows them to do everything they want to do without having to learn the technique. So ARTAS, robotic transplants, future, presently, not a good option. And then the last option is called the DHI transplant. And that's where a provider will actually remove your grafts manually like they do in an FUE or an FUT, but when they place the grafts, the FUE, the FUT, and the ARTAS providers are all going to place them the same way. Essentially poke little holes and then plant those grafts in there. The DHI approach, the removal is the same as the FUE process where you're cutting out those hairs individually, but the placement of those grafts in the hair is different where you're going to use this little tool that almost looks like a child's syringe punch, and maybe we can put a picture of that here so you can see it, but you load the graft into there and then you go to the area and you click a button and the button will push the hair into the skin and do the entire process in one step. Now, the thought track around the DHA process, it's better for the grafts because you're making the hole or the site and planting the transplant or the graft all in the same motion. We have found here at Solve that actually it causes more damage to the hairs. Think about how delicate a hair is. The key or reminder to the viewers is you want those hairs to survive. So you want to treat them as delicately as possible. And with an FUE process, you can manually, delicately pinch them and place them in the hole. With the DHI process, you have to load them into this thing, you have to shove them through this barrel, they get pushed through and then planted in the skin. So it does cause more damage to the hairs, and as a result, with a lot of DHI surgeries, you're seeing more of those hairs die versus with an FUE. So how does this affect cost? So the FUT procedure, the oldest method, the most dated method of taking that strip of hair, is going to be the cheapest. And it's the cheapest because it's the easiest. So if you think about the process or the surgery process of an FUT, you're making 4 total incisions. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're making a big rectangle and then you're ripping that skin out and you're sewing it together. And then the surgeon is done. Surgical techs take that strip of hair, they slice and dissect all the little individual grafts, and then they're ready to plant. It is a cheaper surgery because of its ease. The surgeon is only in there for 4 incisions and then a suture or a stitch of that hair. We're finding that most of the older providers in the industry are still using this method. For the most part, it's been eliminated. Most of the older providers are using it because that's what they're used to. They've been doing that for 20 or 30 years. There are rare instances where the FUT is recommended. So that's where if a patient's donor hair is really, really small and we need a maximized number of grafts, if a patient comes in like that and we need more grafts than we can get with an FUE of doing the little punches, we'll actually recommend them to a surgeon for an FUT. But 90% of the time, the FUT procedure is cheaper, but it is worse. So if you're out there looking for a procedure and you find a clinic that's offering an absurdly low price in the US, first question I would ask him, is it an FUT or is it something else? 99% of the time, that procedure is an FUT if that price is abnormally low in the US. The next cheapest procedure, usually, and DHI, FUE, and ARTAS, robotic is they're sort of all over the place, but usually the ARTAS or the robotic transplant is going to be a little bit cheaper. And again, because it takes less staff. You don't have a surgeon punching out the grafts. You have a tech who knows how to use the ARTAS operating a machine, almost like a video game, targeting those grafts and then punching them out. The ARTAS is a very expensive machine for providers. You're talking about, I believe the last quotes I saw was like $1 million to purchase it, and then they charge the provider $1 per graft. So oftentimes providers are going to buff the price up to compensate for the cost of the machine and the leasing price of paying per graft. The next two processes are the FUE and DHI, which are very similar in cost because the extraction method is identical because you're with the surgeon, you're individually cutting out those hairs. The placement of the grafts is the only part that's different. So with the FUE, putting the holes and putting them in, DHI, punching them in with that little injector tool. Cost factor for transplants is the extent of your hair loss. So the number of grafts that you're going to need. If you go in and you have just a small area that you're treating, say it's 500-600 grafts, versus if you go in and you're fully bald and you need multiple procedures and upwards of 3,000-4,000 grafts, the sheer volume of the number of grafts is going to impact the cost. So here at Solve, our rate price is $5 per graft. So if you came in and you just needed a small area touched up and you needed 500 grafts, you're looking at a cost of $2,500. Versus if you come in and say your entire hairline is gone and you needed 1,800 to 2,000 grafts, you're looking at a cost of $9,000 to $10,000. So when you are going through this process, look at how extensive your hair loss is and understand that if you have really extensive hair loss, it's a larger procedure, so a larger cost. If you have minor hair loss, then it's a smaller procedure and lower cost. The third big factor for the cost of your procedure is the location. Now, the landscape of hair transplants today is pretty crazy. You have providers in Turkey that are extremely cheap. Turkey, India, Mexico, we've heard people going all over the place. And in these countries, let's use Turkey as an example, you are going to find the cheapest prices. We're seeing patients that are going in for a transplant are paying $3,000 to $4,000. They're getting round trip travel, hotel stay, and a transplant, all for that price point. There is not a single provider in the US that can compete with that. The caveat there is that doing a transplant in a foreign country, not in the US, does have its applied risks. So the biggest risk being, when you're doing procedures in a country like Turkey, they are able to do things cheaper because they have unregulated, or rather less regulated medicine. Meaning, they don't have to have malpractice insurance, they don't have to pay their employees much, and anybody off the street in Turkey can go into a clinic and do a procedure. Now, that being said, we have seen patients go and get amazing results in Turkey. You can see them online. A lot of people get amazing results there. You just need to understand the risks. So if you fly to Turkey and get a procedure, you come back to the US, say something is wrong, you need to follow up with the provider. Now the only option is you have to either fly back to Turkey and have them look at it again, and then you have to pay for that because they're not going to pay for your return visit, or you need to find a provider in the US that's willing to see you. The complication there is that if you get a transplant overseas and then you try to see a provider in the US, most US providers are not going to be able to accept your care because they can't take the liability of somebody else's work that they did overseas. So there is risk involved. When patients come to see me, one of the big questions is, what is your budget? Can we do this within your budget? Whether it's an upfront cost or a finance cost. And if we can't, I tell patients if the cost is prohibitive in the US, absolutely prohibitive, then that is the green light to go overseas because they do still do great work there. But if the cost isn't fully prohibitive and you can figure out a way to do a procedure in the US, it is always safer to do a surgery in the US just because of the protection that you have here with the way that medicine is run in the US, with the checks and balances we have here, and then if there is a worst case scenario, you have your provider in your backyard so you can come and see them. The other big factor, or the other big location factor, is where in the country you live. Now, if you live in the Northeast, like in New York City, you're going to pay a premium price. We're seeing typically $10 to $15 per graft. If you live on the West Coast in California or Los Angeles, again, you're going to pay a premium price, $10 to $15 a graft. What we have here at Solve, being in Chicago, is that we are in a major city that doesn't cost as much as the coasts, as the West Coast or the Northeast, so we're able to do a lower cost because our operating costs are lower. So here at Solve Clinics, our price is $5 per graft. So with patients, when you're selecting where to go, especially patients that live in some of these more expensive cities, you have a unique opportunity to look at providers that are outside of your city. Our average New York patient is saving about 50% on the cost of their procedure coming to us in Chicago. From an application standpoint, you're looking taking an hour, 2-hour flight, coming to see us, staying into a hotel, getting the procedure done, going home, and then saving 50% on the cost of your surgery. And then on top of that, coming to see a provider, the #1 provider, the highest rated provider in Chicago. So the upsides are really, really high, but location is a factor. So if you're gonna go to an expensive city, big surprise, it's gonna be more expensive. If you're gonna go to a more affordable area, it's gonna be less expensive, and that's because just the cost of operating in those places is higher. I hope you found this video helpful. Please comment below, let us know what you think. Give us a thumbs up, I think is something that we need, and a subscription, so that would be awesome if you could do that, because it would justify then me doing this and getting more videos. If we don't get them, I might not have to do these again, so maybe that's a win for me too, who knows? But give us comments, let us know, let me know if this is helpful. Let us know what additional things you want us to talk about or you want me to talk about. I'd be more than happy to address anything you may have. And finally, if you have questions specific to hair loss options and procedures, and you need an expert that's going to be honest with you and that you want to talk to, reach out to us. You can go to our website, solveclinics.com. You can submit a form. We do virtual consultations as well as in-person consultations. They are absolutely free. The goal of myself and my entire team here and the patient advocates that run that side of the business is to do a medical analysis of what you're going through and then to deliver that information to you in a way that's easy to understand, it's easy to digest, and is upfront and direct without feeling like we're trying to force you to do something. We are primarily educators and then secondary providers. Step 1 is to educate and let you make the best decision possible. And then ultimately, if that decision is a procedure and a procedure with us, then we're gonna step in and be the best provider possible for you. Thank you for listening. Let us know if you need anything. See you later.